Thank you for joining us. I'm ABC 24 anchor Pepper Baker. Tennessee's 9th congressional district race is shaping up to be a competitive one. Constituents will vote for their Democratic and Republican nominees for the state municipal primaries on August 6th. So we are profiling the frontrunners of this particular race. And so for our third interview of this series for the 9th Congressional District of Tennessee, we are welcoming Devante Hill to the table. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Ms. Baker.
Perfect. All right, so let's just start with why you are running for Tennessee's 9th Congressional District.
Well, as you know, I'm running for Tennessee's 9th Congressional District because the entirety of the footprint of District 9 is my heart and soul. From Covington, Tennessee, from Brighton to Whitehaven High School, this district encompasses family and friends that I love and care for the absolute most. And so seeing this time and where our political climate is, the time is now, and I have to rise to the occasion.
Yes, most definitely. So at what particular moment did it hit you in your mind? What were you looking at? Where were you when you decided, I need to run?
I decided to run 10 years ago in the month of May when I resigned from Congressman Steve Cohen's office. I had written and published my first book, and I gifted him the book, and he still paid me for it, and so that he wouldn't violate ethics. But I told him that I would be back, that I was going to Memphis to do the groundwork, and that I would come back and sit in that seat. And so I knew 10 years ago that I would be running for this office. I just didn't know when. But the call has been ever so loud these days, more now than ever.
Yeah, so you went from working under Congressman Cohen to now running against him, which is something we'll unpack a little bit later. But for viewers who may not be familiar with you, can you give us a little bit of backstory on your career and who you are?
Sure. I'm Devante Hill, native son to this area. I have a unique story. It's a conglomerate of both a rural aspect of Tipton County and the metropolitan experience of obviously Shelby County. And we just have been continuously doing the work the last decade, the work of service, the work of activism, and just making sure that we are answering these issues that our constituents have faced with wisdom and with clarity, with moral clarity, and wanting to make sure that we were also working across the board with those who perhaps share different ideals. And so I think that from the military, from the experience of being exposed to legislatures like Sheila Jackson Lee and John Lewis and Elijah Cummings and even Congressman Steve Cohen, you know, at a very early age, it only prepared me for this time and it prepared me for this moment.
Most definitely. So I will say, I feel like you are known a lot through your activism work. And so, you know, you've also mentioned your career starting off, or the jumping point at least, was with Congressman Cohen. So what about those two together makes you feel very prepared to represent District 9 in the U.S. Congress?
Sure. This moment and this time in our democracy is calling for activists who understand the importance of transitioning from activism to activation. And that looks like changing the language, understanding proper decorum on House floors when you are legislating. This moment is calling for young emerging leaders with energy, with innovation, and who understand the importance of reimagining and giving new language to a majority House and a presidential administration that perhaps can't use our language of the past, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's a strong answer there, I would say. What are the biggest issues that you are running on?
There are so many issues to go down the list. I was having a conversation with my grandmother on my way here, and just knowing that there are issues that our aging community are facing, there are issues that obviously our young people are facing, but I think the biggest one happens to be transportation. It's probably one of the biggest issues that drives poverty here in the city, according to the Greater Memphis Chamber of Commerce. It would be transportation, education, and also public safety is a big one.
Okay, I like that you added transportation in there, because that's not always at the forefront of a lot of people's issues. And we know MATA is quite a big problem here. So any specifics you can give on how you see to improve the system?
Sure. I seek to improve the system by using the data and the study that has been available for every candidate. The Greater Memphis Chamber of Commerce conducted a study in 2021, if I'm not mistaken, and we found through a conglomerate of studies beyond what we thought that transportation really is the biggest driving force of poverty here in the city. People have no access, and MATA has not been a very reliable source of transportation. Last week, I made an attempt to ride the MATA just to see what it's like, and it took me an hour and a half to go from downtown to Orange Mound. And I just can't imagine having to do that and get to work on time, get your children to work on time, and relying on public transportation. So people have to be able to get to work. They have to be able to get to school. Secondly, I think beyond the work that we've seen with Congressman Cohen and state legislatures to build a new bridge here, the federal government's wallet is already open. Obviously, as it pertains to infrastructure, we have to fix our roads. Memphis is already living below the poverty line, and we have people who are experiencing blowouts on their tires just riding down a flat highway. And that ties into our infrastructure budget. So those are the things that I seek to champion. And of course, I want to support all things pertaining to public safety and all things pertaining to education.
Most definitely. So let's talk about the public safety aspect here. We know that the Memphis Safe Task Force is in town, and a lot of people are on different sides of that, but crime is trending down. So how do you feel about the Memphis Safe Task Force, how it was the National Guard was deployed here, and how local leaders were able to facilitate that type of collaboration with the federal government?
Sure. My grandmother oftentimes says that we have to walk and chew gum at the same time. And so there are pros and cons to the Memphis Safe Task Force. I think the biggest issue that we have seen thus far with the Memphis Safe Task Force is the way that it has been rolled out. I applaud Mayor Paul Young for at least being at the table. We can get nothing done if we're not at the table to understand what is happening. If we go into our Democratic corner and allow them to play offense in their Republican corner, the community will never come together. The people will continue to suffer, and we will continue to be on an activist side of things. And what makes the transition from activist to activator is realizing that this is an opportunity for us to actually bring real solutions and partnerships between the federal government and our local law enforcement. I think every local law enforcement across the country would welcome federal support. I'm not so sure, even as a veteran and as someone who experienced the task force in another city before it came to Memphis, I'm not so sure if it was helpful or even resourceful to have the National Guard here. I'm not so sure if it was helpful or resourceful or a good use of resources to rip people off of their jobs because they are undocumented. I think this other administration has championed connecting the terms undocumented and illegal immigrants and making them criminal. And I think it's just not moral. It's not, it's been disgusting to watch, quite frankly. I think we all can agree, yes, we want dangerous, undocumented immigrants off of our streets and out of our country. Absolutely. Deport them back back to the places they come from. Absolutely. We're all 100% there. But there are great people here in this city that have not been able to navigate the complex immigration structure that our country has yet to fix. But they are here. They are working jobs that most of us probably don't want to work, but they're doing it, and they're doing it to perfection, and they're doing it probably better than some of us. And we're ripping them off of their jobs. We're hurting our community. We're hurting their community. And I just don't believe that it's plausible for us to be excited about the arrest of undocumented immigrants who are not breaking the law. And that's what we're seeing from Tennessee lawmakers who are on the other side. They are doing town hall meetings suggesting that we have seen great success with Donald Trump's Memphis Safe Task Force. The reality is no one is seeing how many people that ICE are detaining. And they're using different terminologies and realizing that it's a different department that is keeping up with those numbers. So they're only touting the arrests of local criminals and how many people they've been able to arrest without unpacking how many of these arrests are actually criminal acts versus a speeding ticket. We've seen thus far that there's a language interference of undocumented immigrants and illegal immigrants. You know, there's a criminality understanding that the GOP is pushing as well. So we have to ask ourselves, Who are we calling criminals in our city during this Memphis Safe Task Force? So I think we all want safer streets. I want safer streets. I'm tired of going to funerals of children. I think our universities have experienced deaths of students who were on campus or people who have sent their children to college campuses here in the city. We have to address crime, but we address crime in a holistic way, and we were doing that. Crime was already trending prior to the Memphis Safe Task Force. So I hate that we became the guinea pig of Donald Trump, but because the federal government's wallet was wide open, we have to be able to utilize it to our full advantage.
Do you feel confident that, this is such a polarizing topic that it seems like if you are not for it, you're on one side, and if you are for it, you're on a whole other side, and there's not a ton of ability to be in between. So are you confident that you would be able to go against the Trump administration or at least speak against certain policies or acts like the Memphis Safe Task Force, but not doing so in a way that totally pushes you into one side or the other?
I think the difference between at least the younger candidate and myself is during 2020 when they were saying defund the police. Whereas I was saying, let's reimagine public safety. Let's reallocate funding. And I think right now we have to push. If I was currently the congressman, I would push for congressional oversight. I'm not saying let's abolish the Memphis Safe Task Force, but let's give it more oversight. Let's give it more control. Let's unpack the numbers. Let's create some transparency, a dashboard so people can understand and see visibly who's being locked up and for what reason. So I think that there is a need for the Memphis Safe Task Force, and I think it's an opportunity for us to be a global example of how you address crime in your city when you create partnerships between the federal government and local law enforcement, as multiple administrations have been riding the back of. We have a small police department per capita of population. And if that's the case, if that's the position that they'll have, fine. Let's invite the federal government in to come help clean up the streets of Memphis. But let's also make sure that our constituents are being met with dignity, that they are not just being pulled over just because they're black. We've seen videos of ICE agents who are saying, I have a plausible reason to pull you over or pull you to the side because you look like you're from another country. That's unconstitutional. And so we have to make sure that if we're addressing public safety in a way that is going to actually be productive and make our citizens happy, we have to do so keeping dignity at the forefront of public service.
Okay, and this opens up something I want to give you a chance to address, because you have been on the other side of the law before, and there was an instance where you were arrested in 2016 for a false report, and which you ended up pleading guilty in 2019. So at the same time that you were also on a panel to vet out the new director for the Memphis Police. So I'm curious to know how being on the other side of that and having to go through the criminal justice system yourself, one, addressing that situation that for people who are familiar with it, and two, has it at all helped your perspective on how to attack crime at all? Absolutely.
I personally feel that my arrest stemmed from 2012, just reemerged in 2016. I absolutely wholeheartedly appreciate that time and that moment. I got into a nasty conversation with a detective and he in turn used the criminal justice system to his advantage. And that is what sparked the 2016 protests, the conversation that I had with the detective. He was saying that he was going to have me arrested because I kept calling him over and over and over again to follow up on a computer. And I had to navigate the criminal justice system without resources, without an expensive attorney, and much like most Memphians. And so it gave me a front row, hands-on experience of what most Memphians, and especially black men, are facing here in this city. It gave me an understanding of what the jail system looks like on the 5th floor, and how this deteriorating jail system that is not on the radar of our current incumbent congressman, which it should be, it gave me a front row perspective of how inhumane it was, and how someone has to leave that jail and have a voice and an advocacy to see how we can play a part in bringing solutions to make this jail better, because no one should be sentenced to death while they are awaiting a criminal sentence. And that is where I find a grace and a gratitude for myself having gone through that. I also realize Memphis has watched me grow up. I was 23 years old when I led the protest across the bridge. At 23, shaping government, putting demands before a mayor, having the mayor to create incubator programs as it pertains to minority business contracting that now sits at 24% versus the 3% of $540 million. And so all of this has just been a learning lesson that has prepared me for this time and prepared me for this moment. Whereas Congressman Cohen has said that the jail is not on his radar, that's a county mayor and a county sheriff problem. I'm saying, well, if the Memphis Safe Task Force has the federal government's pocket wide open, then we have to ask ourselves, why are people who are waiting for a sentence in the jail, why are they not receiving adequate health care? That falls at the desk of the congressman. You know, that's the health department, and the congressman is funding the health department's health care structure. And so for me, that experience 10 years ago, it's been a decade now, and I no longer live under the shadow of any of that, and I write about it in my upcoming book on how it prepared me for this time and this moment. That's what makes me different from these other candidates. I have real life experiences about the things that I'm talking about. That's why I don't need a prep. I don't need a debate prep. I don't necessarily need the questions beforehand, because these are things that not only I have lived, but my constituents have lived as well. I guarantee you I can walk out onto this street right now and pull over the first African-American male, and he'll tell you firsthand that he's been pulled over for some odd reason that made no sense, or that he has forgotten his driver's license at home and received a misdemeanor citation. These are things that our constituents have been plagued with since the death of Dr. Martin Luther King in this city. And so it is the culture. And so I'm appreciative that I received my burning, my thorn in my flesh, my credibility when I go to the National Civil Rights Museum and I see the wall of civic leaders who made a massive difference in the world, but they all had a mugshot. I'm encouraged, and I find strength in that.
Yeah, I do think you have an interesting perspective here, because not a lot of elected leaders have the perspective of what it's like to actually be incarcerated or having to go through the criminal justice system. So to see you out on the other side and then trying to effectively make change, I would say may work in your advantage. You mentioned your activist work, of course, and you did lead, over 1,000 Memphians up to the M Bridge when you were only 23. And so activists, and oftentimes when I talk to political people or people who are in elected office, seems that activism has to only go so far before you can really make effective change. So I want your perspective on that. You know, do you have to hang up the activist hat at some point in order to be effective on policy and getting bipartisan support? So how do you navigate both worlds?
Yeah, and I think it's vitally important that we understand that you can do both. You can do both, but you do so under the auspice of transitioning between activism and activation. And when you become a legislator, you have to understand that when you're on that House floor and you're preparing to represent your constituents, you are an activator. That is your opportunity to make change. When you are in the realm or the spirit of an activist, that is you bringing awareness. That is the bullhorn march, if you will. And I think both have to have an existence in the world. So I have no critiques, or I have no jabs at the other candidate for blurring the lines of both. But I think it does our constituents a disservice when we can't distinguish the time to be an activist and the time it's to be an activator. I'm a man of faith. And the Bible talks about there's a time for everything. There's a time to live, there's a time to die. There's a time to be an activist, and there's a time to be a legislator, and I'm prepared to do both.
But have you had experience in actually drafting up legislation and getting it passed? You know,
I'm grateful that you asked me that. You know, Chief C.J. Davis is the first African-American female police director here in the city. But prior to her getting here in 2020, when everyone said that we were protesting for no reason, we made tangible policy changes to the city's memorandum. Through our meetings, one-on-ones with city leadership, we were able to make policy changes that ultimately gave C.J. Davis the ability to fire immediately the officers that killed Tyree Nichols. Without the policy changes that we made in 2020, those officers would be on a paid leave. They will be navigating a system of arbitration, and they probably would still be on the job, perhaps. But when we made those policy changes in 2020, it created a lever, an ability to actually go and immediately fire these officers, something that even Attorney Ben Crump has announced that has not been done across the entire country. So Memphis, whereas we'd like to be hard on ourselves, we are leading the charge in so many different ways. And so we have to remove our trauma from our vision and begin to see forward on how we can create pathways to change. I truly still believe that Memphis can be the catalyst of change for the entire world. And we're leading to do so, and I plan to make that the platform.
Okay. We could sit here and do this whole interview on public safety alone, but you also mentioned education. So where are you kind of seeing where you will take charge in that, on that front?
Sure. I think across the board, our legislatures, both from state level, local level, even our county level legislatures, I think we have to formulate a unilateral, unified messaging. Even when we go to Nashville, there has to be a one message. It can't be 5 different legislatures going into the office trying to get 5 different things. Mm-hmm. So as a congressman, it would be my ambition to bring our legislatures together, specifically our school board body, specifically our new school superintendent, Rod Richmond, and even our local grassroots organizations like the Memphis Lift and some of the other organizations that are doing the grassroots work, and we can formulate an actual agenda. And when we formulate an agenda, we can see how the federal government can step in, how the state level can step in, and how the local government will step in, and we'll create that agenda. And now we know what we need when we go and see the governor. Now we know how to communicate when I go to DC and I have to have a conversation with the WWE owner. So it's like, we have to consolidate our messaging. We have to make it very clear what we need based on data. We have to celebrate our successes and realize our areas of opportunity and areas of growth, and pull on the federal government to fill in the gap between.
Now, I know as a U.S. congressman, you would be more so hands-on in D.C., but when we're talking about education, we are seeing already a conflict between local control and the state control over possibly having a takeover of Memphis Shelby County schools. Where's your stance on that? Should there be an appointed oversight board from the state to look over the budget, taking away authority from the local elected officials on the school board?
Yeah, I always feel, with District 9 being much more than just Shelby County, it also includes Tipton County. And the teachers out there, of course, I've been making my rounds to all the high schools, all the middle schools, teaching the young men how to tie ties. And so I'm hearing firsthand from teachers, not just in Shelby County, but also in Tipton County, on the relationship between the school boards and the state right now currently. Mm-hmm. So it's not just a Shelby County problem, it's a Tipton County problem as well. Wow. The state is implementing its oversight in ways that are astronomical, we've never seen before. You have the state in cahoots with the Charlie Kirk Turning Point organization, and they are making their way to indoctrinate our children the teachings of Charlie Kirk, and that's coming from the state. But they're also limiting teachers from teaching certain aspects of Black history. And so when we talk about state control and state oversight, even as it pertains to the Shelby County school system's budget, I think the state is going too far, and we have to allow our local government to do the job. Having said that, when our local government, our local school boards can't get the job done with moral clarity, with integrity, and with sustainability, I do think that it is necessary for the state to come in and bring some degree of structure, I hate to use the term control, I like to use the term structure. Because oftentimes when you're dealing with leaders, some of our leaders in the city are very passionate, they're very colorful, and they express themselves in very unique ways. And it's not an absence of integrity, sometimes it's an absence of professional structure. And I think that if the state comes in and make it very apparent on what the state expectation is as it pertains to structure, as it pertains to a budget, I think we'll find, that support in structuring is much better than a state control or a state takeover.
Okay, that's a good perspective there. You mentioned transportation, which I think goes into the next issue of economic development as well as recruiting businesses. So I can probably guess that transportation will have a lot to do with that, but we are seeing less people wanting to live in District 9. It's particularly Shelby County, but I can't imagine Tipton might be feeling the same way. But what would you say about any ways of increasing economic development? Is all money good money when we talk about certain companies coming in and setting up shop in our area, or and also getting families to want to settle here?
Sure. Strengthening families is probably one of my highest priorities. As I have matriculated into my 30s, I realized that a lot of my peers who I graduated high school with have moved out of the city, have moved out of the area. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, why are we preparing our young talent to go abroad and to be globally competitive, but we're not creating a nest for them to come and set up camp here at home to be great? And so for me, absolutely, as a small business owner, I'm a third generation entrepreneur. I know the importance of building strong economical development plans. I know the importance of being able to protect our air quality, but also being able to advance our ambition to have our children to be on the forefront globally of STEM programs. And so we have to, again, walk. My grandmother is my favorite person in the world. We have to walk and chew gum at the same time. We can protect our communities and make sure that organizations and companies aren't coming in and seeing Memphis as just another cheap labor opportunity. But we can also come in, which I think our city, we have these structures in place already. The EDGE program is doing that work. The Chamber of Commerce, they're doing that work. They're requiring a certain amount of employees to be hired, a certain amount of wage to be earned in order to, the city's not just handing out tax incentives to whoever comes into the city. There is a standard that is in place. And so oftentimes when we see other leaders pimping the emotions of the constituents, they're not always being factual and truthful sometimes. And I think that just sitting back the last year and a half, it has become furthermore disgruntling just watching all of that transpire. And so, yeah, I'm navigating that space now. We're ushering in 500 equitable paying jobs, and we're utilizing those structures. We're making sure that the company that's coming from abroad is taking advantage of the tariff structure that is consistently changing with the administration, but there are exemptions in place for companies that want to set camp up in Memphis. The state has industrial exemptions available through the Tennessee Department of Revenue for companies that want to come and do business and create jobs here in the district. But we have to make sure that we're not running those opportunities away. Companies don't want to be in the headline of news when they're wanting to come into a community and be of great impact beyond the service that they are providing. And so we have to be vitally careful with that, especially in this day and time where jobs are necessary here in Memphis. If we're talking about eradicating poverty, we can't do that if we're running companies away.
Okay, yeah, you have a really good hold on what is happening locally, obviously, but we have to remember that you are running for U.S. Congress. And so you're talking about companies from abroad and whatnot. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the current conflict abroad right now in the Middle East. And as a U.S. congressman, you would be tasked with possibly voting for these certain measures happening with the Trump administration and what he is continuously doing over in Iran. So what is your stance on the attacks in Iran, and what would you do as U.S. Congress, if you were U.S. Congressman right now representing District 9, how would you have a voice in this?
First and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge the service members who have lost their lives at the very start of this. You know, I'm a little emotional about it because I have family members, I have siblings that are serving in Bahrain, they're serving in Kuwait. You know, I went 2 days without hearing from my family members, not knowing if they were even okay. I think that this didn't just start with this war in Iran, it started with Mexico 2 weeks ago. We saw with Mexico, we saw that the president and this administration had everything to do with the upsurge with the cartel in Mexico while there were American citizens in Puerto Vallarta, stuck, couldn't get out in the middle of the danger. The absolute same thing has occurred as it pertains to what's happening in the Middle East. Embassies are closing down. Americans can't get home. Flights are stuck, and so they're in the middle of war. Literally the middle of war. And to have American citizens in the middle of a war that we are starting without a pathway out, it just, for me, it screams unprofessional. It screams that Congress was not involved with this at all. Because any great congressman, I think this issue is not a partisan issue. This is an American issue. Every Republican should be upset right now that they had no clue that this was going on. They probably would have said, I would hope that the Republican Party would have said, well, what about the Americans that are in the Middle East? What about the Americans that are in Dubai? There has been no plan, no strategy for this unconstitutional bombing in Iran. I think if the ambition here was to dismantle Iran's nuclear capabilities, we have to take ourselves back a few months when the president said that they had taken care of that already. And so we went from taking care of that already to now being in a war. We first need to know what is the truth, because clearly we have missed what has been factual. I think that this war has to have limitations. It has to have a budget. I question, how do we have money for a war in our defense budget or our war budget, but we're taking away health care in America? I question if Republicans, if Democrats, when I become congressman, I'm going to be the congressman for District 9, and my constituents out in Tipton County, a lot of them are Republican. And they're probably going to be voting for me. So I have to make sure that I'm also considering their concerns as well. But this is an American concern. Eggs are 3 times the cost in which they once were 3 years ago. Inhalers are so we are already experiencing the damage of this tariff war that started. And now we have to take on the rising fuel. I think fuel is going to be rising 10 cents a day for the next 5 days. Americans are already striked. That's not a Democratic talking point. That's not a Republican talking point. This is an American issue. I think every person who voted for Donald Trump because he was lowering the cost of everyday things here in America. We're not seeing that. And so I think this war was unconstitutional. I think we need to, there's a slew of items that I will put on the table that there's just a slew of items that I will put on the table, even with our, oh God, it just goes, as a veteran, it's just seeing how all of this has unfolded. It has disgusted me as a person who is watching their relatives serve this country in uncertainty. It is a very scary thing to watch. And I think that this is beyond a Democratic talking point. I think Americans in general are overwhelmed by the vacillating changes of this presidential administration. I think we want stability. We want peace. We want to love our neighbor. And I think that the president should have ran on that for the State of the Union. But instead, he used that as an opportunity to further the divide, and so that state lawmakers like Brent Taylor can continue to have disparaging things to say about ICE and the Memphis Safe Task Force.
Right. So I want to touch on one point more about this, but we're going into overtime a little bit here. So Steve Cohen, Congressman Steve Cohen, mentioned that his experience is exactly what is needed right now for the constituents in the last 2 years of Trump's term, and that the connections he has is the reason why constituents need to vote for him instead of putting all of their faith in, I guess, a freshman congressman is what the term used for new congressmen. So, what do you have to say about your ability if you were elected to come in fresh face? Instead of voting for someone who has those connections in there and maybe can push the needle in ways that maybe a freshman may not be able to?
When I become congressman, I have every intention of sitting down with Congressman Steve Cohen and pulling all the wisdom that he's seeking to pour and create the relationships that are necessary so that this district and our country can win. I think it's necessary biblically to sit at the window. Timothy sat at the windowsill of Paul and scribed everything that Paul had already done, but he prophetically knew what he needed to go and get accomplished. And so I think that it's time for fresh, innovative, qualified leaders to take this district to the next level, but also realizing that Congressman Steve Cohen has done a phenomenal job. His ability to touch his constituent services have been phenomenal. But what good is a restaurant with great customer service that is deteriorating? In my opinion, I think that Congressman Cohen has to resolve internally that there are young, competent leaders who want to expand the legacy that he has spent 2 decades building, and I'm prepared to do that with honor and service to he and his service.
All right, respectable answer. Let's talk about fundraising. How are your efforts going?
I'm excited about fundraising, yeah.
Okay, are you able to give a dollar amount of where you stand? And what you don't have in money, sometimes you can make up an endorsement. So dollar amount or anybody that's backing you?
What I'm most excited about as it pertains to fundraising is that I'm looking to make it very clear that this seat cannot be purchased. The person that raises the most money won't always be the person that wins the seat. While the last 10 years in this world of activism and in my professional career, I have built quite an extensive network that spans from Mark Cuban to the list goes on. I have not asked for anything because we have my network, we've been preparing for this moment a decade. And so we've been preparing for it. We've activated that network. So we're super excited about all that's taking place in the realm of fundraising. Of course, you have to have money to raise. You have to have money to win this race, without a doubt. And I'm excited to be able to do that. But I'm also not comparing myself to the other candidates. We have a candidate that is being funded $1 million by an organization that only has a 22% success rate. The Leaders We Deserve organization does not have a plausible success rate on choosing the right leader. And so I question the spirit in which they are choosing these leaders. And we have Congressman Steve Cohen, who has a war chest, without a doubt. But we also realize that time is not in his service. And so it would behoove him to choose one of the candidates that would best expand his legacy, both with the hospital, both with the Tennessee Lottery, which he's most famous for, and also this bridge. And I'm looking forward to doing that and convincing not just my constituents that I am the right candidate, but I'm looking forward to convincing Congressman Steve Cohen that he can vote for me as well.
Okay, so you can't give us a dollar amount, but is there any money that you would reject, any sources that you wouldn't take?
Yeah, I think it's vitally important to make this campaign, as we shift what District 9 looks like, we have to shift it to a people-powered campaign. And so I know for a fact, what I'm certain of is that we are already receiving small dollar amounts and large dollar amounts from everyday constituents here in Memphis. The small business owner to the person that's working at McDonald's. I had someone to donate $3 to me, a high school student. And I value every single one of those contributions. And so we're looking forward to seeing how all of this pans out. I'm excited to see it. I'm waking up, oddly enough, I'm not nervous, I'm not overwhelmed. It's almost as if I'm just showing up and my faith is doing the rest. And I'm watching the favor of the Lord continue to expand itself over this campaign, and I'm confident in it.
Okay, I have just 3 more questions here. So you've probably made it pretty clear as far as why you are the better choice over incumbent Steve Cohen, or this is just the time to take the reins, and hopefully he will kind of take you in under his wing, if you will, and pass on the torch. But anybody who may think that you are a little more in line with the likes of Representative Justin Pearson, how do you differentiate yourselves, given that you both have activism background and are both pretty young too?
Yeah, I think State Representative Justin Pearson is a phenomenal young man. I think he is polished, he is poised, and I think he represents the best that Memphis has to offer, without a doubt. I think the difference between the two of us obviously has been the actual tangible change that we can quantify that has been connected to the service that I have been laying out over the course of the last decade. The difference between the two of us is that he's an elected official twice, with no bills, no tangible anything connected to his name other than co-sponsored bills. I think he has a subcommittee bill currently that's moving through the House on veterans suicide awareness, which I think is a very important topic that he should champion as a veteran. I support that. The difference between the two of us is also emotional maturity. When I went and had the conversation at the Church of God in Christ on the grounds of the Holy Convocation, I approached, which is where I'm born in, the Church of God in Christ. I made it apparent to walk up to Representative Pearson, whom I had never met in person before, and made it clear, hey, I'm going to be running, and I want to run an honorable, respectable race. My response received back from him was not noble, it was not respectful, and it furthermore made it clear to me that we're dealing with someone who perhaps has noble ambition, but perhaps there is an absence of emotional intelligence that's necessary for the political fitness required to win this seat.
Wow. Okay, my last question here is kind of goes into the same, but what's at stake for Tennessee's 9th congressional district, and how does a vote for you put constituents in a better position?
There's a lot at stake. I'll just give you what's at stake with the 3 candidates that we currently have. With Congressman Steve Cohen, we're seeing in other states like Houston or Texas, if you will, or maybe Arizona or Utah, when a service member, something happens to that service member. Not to say that Steve Cohen's going to die or anything like that, because my grandmother is older than Steve Cohen, and she drove to breakfast this morning. So, but if anything happens to him, this political party and this political climate will suffer. Memphis will suffer. We saw in Houston, they went a year and a half without representation because this presidential administration is leveraging the death of congressmen and women to control the House. And so we have another Congress lady who was elected, if I'm not mistaken, if not Arizona, Utah, one of the states over on the West, but she went a year. Those constituents went a year without representation because their service member died in office. And so it is a risk. It is a continued risk that if something happens to Congressman Cohen, this House majority will not, they will not swear in a new candidate. And so we have to make the shift while we can. And when we consider Justin Pearson, Representative Justin Pearson, I'm sorry, I'd like to be respectful. Representative Justin Pearson has not proven himself to be a coalition builder. He is not a caucus builder. We have not seen him in an ability to work across the aisle to get things done. And I think as an activist myself, I would love to continue to see Representative Pearson evolve in the space of legislating and evolve in the space of activism to activation, to know how, when you can't get the vote that you need, how to go and create partnerships to make the work still happen. And I'd be more than happy. You know, I'm not looking to be a career politician. I'd be more than happy to pass the mantle on to Justin Pearson when the time is right. But when we're talking about my grandmother's Medicaid and we're talking about Social Security, we have the aging community here in Memphis. You know, they're losing their homes because they need nursing care, nursing home care. And we're talking about young people who are hopeless in our community that are my siblings, my cousins, my family members, my friends. I have something to say, and I will not sit back and just let this be a puppet show. I'm going to step into this opportunity, and I'm going to seize it and master it.
Okay. All right, Devante Hill. I think you pleaded your case very well here. I hope our viewers have a little more of an understanding of who you are and are more educated after this interview. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I know you're a busy man. And thank you for watching. You can watch all things elections on abc24.com, on our social media apps, and on our streaming app 24+.